R.A. Salvatore is known predominantly as a fantasy author, having written over 40 books set in the Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting of the Forgotten Realms, and his most popular character is the dark elf Drizzt Do'Urden. But Salvatore has written some sci-fi novels, in particular, 2 Star Wars novels. He wrote the series opener for the New Jedi Order, Vector Prime, and he also returned to write the novelization for Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. Vector Prime made it to number 10 on the New York Times bestseller list for the week of October 31st, 1999, and was ultimately on the list for 4 weeks. I remember being really excited about Vector Prime because Del Rey and Lucasfilm Publishing was pushing as this big blockbuster event, not to be missed. So as soon as my library got a copy of Vector Prime, I read it. I was both really intrigued and really sad, but clearly my sadness didn't overwhelm the intrigue I felt at the end because I did go on to read the rest of the series. So a brief summary. 21 years after the Battle of Endor, a new threat emerges from beyond the farthest reaches of the Outer Rim. Suddenly, all our heroes, the Skywalkers, the Solos, and Chewbacca, are thrust again into battle, but this time all their courage, sacrifice, and even the Force may not be enough to stop this threat. I worried at first going into Vector Prime that it was going to rely too heavily on the books that came before it, but I think that this is actually a really good starting place. Salvatore explains all you need to know, and there were only a few instances where I felt I was missing out on vital information. Luke Skywalker finds himself with a growing Jedi Order that's perhaps growing so much that he wants to reinstate the Jedi Council. Obviously, this is a plot point that wouldn't have been able to occur were it not for Episode 1, so it's interesting to see how the authors are starting to utilize some of the developments from the first movie. Leia is no longer Chief of State. She's stepped down, but she's still serving in a political manner in that she's being sent to places as an ambassador or as a diplomat. Mara Jade is married to Luke Skywalker now, and she's training her niece, Jaina Solo. Likewise, Luke is serving as Jedi Master to his 2 nephews, Jacen and Anakin. And Mara Jade is going through an awful lot in this book. At an undisclosed time before the book started, she came down with a strange illness that is attacking and trying to change the very cells in her body. And so she's struggling with teaching her niece, fighting her illness, but also staying strong and independent. I did find the timeline with her illness a little confusing. This was one of the few bits where I wondered if I was missing something, had not read something, and I don't think that's the case. It just felt like Mara's sickness was presented to the reader as a fait accompli, whereas when I read about it, all I could think was, well, when did this happen? And how did this happen? And where did this happen? And why did this happen? We get the answer to why the Yuuzhan Vong agent Nom Anor poisoned her and a number of other people with Coombe spores. But we don't really get any of the other answers there. It's a very vague before the book started. Lando, once again, has another business venture that he's running, which Lando seems to go through a lot of business ventures, but considering that Lando's the only person in our main group of characters that ever seems to really concern himself with money, I'm fine with that. Lando, you're a businessman. Do as many business deals as you like. And we have a focus on the next generation of Jedi Knights, in this case, the Solo children. So as the book opens, the twins, Jaina and Jacen, are 16, and Anakin is 15? 14? He's a little bit younger than them. Out of all the kids at this point, Jaina sort of received the least development. She likes to fly. She's really good at flying. That's all we get. But Jacen and Anakin have dueling views of how the Force should be used and how Jedi should behave. And while neither of them is 100% right, neither of them is completely wrong either. Jacen's very focused on the Force as guidance, and he thinks having a Jedi Council is unnecessary for Jedi to learn their role in the galaxy and learn to use the Force. Anakin, on the other hand, sees the Jedi in a much more heroic way. He sees the Jedi as fighting evil, but he also sees the power of teamwork and how the Force can't just guide you, but can also bring you closer together. Well, I thought that there were times where all the Solo kids sounded a little too old. The debates between Jacen and Anakin, I thought, were 100% something that teenagers, especially Jedi teenagers, would have. And in trying to form the Jedi Council, Luke is dealing with what I would call rogue Jedi. Jedi who have their own set ideas on what they're doing, and it doesn't always coincide with Luke's vision for the Order. In this case, we have Jedi like Worth Skitter, who's just the worst. And then we also have Kype Durran and his 102 Avengers going around stopping smugglers and yes, I know that his name probably actually, according to the Essential Guide to Characters, is pronounced Kip, but I don't like that. He's been Kype in my head for over 20 years. I can't change it at this point. Ari Salvatore had originally written a new, original character who was this vigilante Jedi going around, but what I'll call the NJO group suggested that instead he use Kype Durran, which is an interesting choice because I'm not sure that I can completely correlate the Kype we saw after the Jedi Academy trilogy with the Kype that's present in this book. After the Jedi Academy trilogy, Kype was really struggling to find his role in the galaxy and how he could atone for what he's done. So to then start reading Vector Prime and see cocky, arrogant Kype Durran doesn't necessarily feel like how I think his character would have developed after the genocide he committed in the Jedi Academy trilogy. Kype also has an apprentice named Miko Reglia. Miko goes through some really bad stuff. He's captured by the Yuuzhan Vong. He's psychologically tortured over and over and over again, and it breaks him. It completely destroys his psyche. And then we have a number of scientists at the poor, ill-fated Exgol station on Belkaden, the only one of whom survives is Danni Quee. I like the idea of Danni Quee, this intelligent female scientist, but the execution of Danni Quee, I'm not so much a fan of. Danni Quee is 21 years old, she's beautiful, she has curly blonde hair and green eyes. She started working for Exgal when she was 18. Is she a child prodigy? How does she have the training to be able to do all this? Everyone on the station looks to her for advice, and when she's captured by the Yuuzhan Vong, they say she's a worthy sacrifice, she could become one of them. And it just feels a bit too much like a perfect Mary Sue character for me. And then we have all the bad guys, all the Yuuzhan Vong we meet. In this case, we have Nominor, a Vong agent who has been operating in the galaxy for some time. He was first introduced in the comic Crimson Empire 2 in 1998, although it was not apparent at that point that he was this extragalactic alien bent on invasion. He just seemed like a mysterious person up to no good. In Vector Prime, he is fomenting tensions between the two worlds of Osarian and Romamul to keep the New Republic focused towards the core so that the Yuuzhan Vong can sneak into the galaxy. But at this point, his plot line, especially in this book, feels incomplete. He's there, he meets with Leia, he gets them to start shooting at each other, and then he takes off, and he's going to cause mayhem somewhere else. Then we have another Yuuzhan Vong agent, Yeoman Carr, who has infiltrated the Exgal station on Belkaden, and he's actually pretty interesting to read about. The scenes on Belkanon feel a lot like a thriller, where slowly he's taking down their defenses, destroying their ability to communicate with the outside world, and then starts killing them one by one. I also like that Yeoman Carr is the first real duel we have between a Yuuzhan Vong and a Jedi. The fight between Mara and him is great to read. It's not a particularly acrobatic or amazing lightsaber battle. What I find more interesting about it is how Mara is faced with a fighter using technology that she's never seen before, fighting in a style she's never seen before, and she's still able to win. And Yeoman Carr dies, but I think, weirdly enough, he respects her for it. And then we have the big pivotal event, the spoiler. I'm gonna say this here. I know this book is over 20 years old, but this is a spoiler. If you have not read this and for some reason you haven't heard this, turn away now. After the halfway point, after all our heroes have arrived on Lando's world of Dobrilon, Lando gives Han and Chewie and Anakin a mission, so to speak. He asks them if they could head to this world, Cernpidal, to drop off a shipment. They arrive only to find chaos and insanity. Cernpidal's moon is slowly coming closer and closer and closer to the planet. The local people have adopted this apocalyptic religious attitude about it. Han and Anakin and Chewie desperately try to find out what's causing this. They find the Dovin Basel that the Yuuzhan Vong have placed, don't quite understand what it is, but do realize that it's exerting this gravity pull over the moon. They're able to destroy it thanks to the sacrifice of the old mare, but it's too late. The planet's going to be destroyed. So Han gets an evacuation in place. They're trying to load as many people on ships as possible to get them off before the world is devastated. Chewie and Anakin turn back to try to save more people, and in a pivotal scene, Chewie realizes that Han will never be able to pull him and Anakin back onto the Millennium Falcon. So he chooses to save Anakin, to save his best friend's son, and to face his death alone. Han is completely devastated by this event. He, understandably, although it does seem very unfair to Anakin, blames Anakin. This was a really controversial decision. R.A. Salvatore got death threats in the mail, which is completely unacceptable. He wrote Chewie a very heroic death scene, and while I think it's really moving, I then also started to wonder about whether a death like that feels true to the Star Wars universe. I'll link an interview with Timothy Zahn in which he talks about how he feels that in Star Wars, it's a tale of good versus evil, but our heroes always eventually triumph. And you are going to lose people along the way, but you aren't going to lose first-tier characters. And so while there's a part of me that just finds Chewie's death so moving and so important, there's a part of me that also agrees with Zahn that while I do feel like character deaths are something that happens in Star Wars, I'm not sure that it's something that I see happening to main characters, and honestly, it's not something I enjoy happening to main characters either. So while there are some things that I thought Salvatore did really good in this book, the Belkanon scenes, the character of Yeoman Carr, sort of that threat of the unknown that the Yuuzhan Vong present at this point, there were also some things that I felt were issues with the book. The first is that a lot of the stuff that happened in the first half felt unnecessary or felt more like plot contrivances. I mentioned how the Osarian-Romamul conflict doesn't really go anywhere other than setting up the character of Nominor. And another one I'll point out is Lando's new business venture. Obviously, that's very important. That's how they're able to defeat the Praetorate Vong at the end of the book. But there's maybe too many scenes when they initially get there. Lando has a asteroid field that he's named Lando's Folly, and he has a game called Running the Belt, where you're in a TIE fighter with repulsors and shields, and you just want to stay in the belt for as long as you can without getting clipped, and the longest time wins. Which is fine. It really sets up how the Solo children are able to defeat so many coral skippers when the Vong attack Dubrillon. But there's also just way too many scenes of different characters trying the game. Jason does it. Anakin does it. Jaina does it, and she's in there for a new record time. Lando tries to talk Luke and Mara into doing it. Han and Chewie do it, and it's just this farce scene where they're panicking, but from the viewpoint, it looks like they're doing really well. Definitely, if I was the editor here, I would have cut some of that. I also felt like this read was the first time I noticed the similarities between the Yuuzhan Vong and a certain Star Trek species. In Star Trek Voyager, there was an alien species called Species 8472. They were one of the few races that the Borg couldn't assimilate. They're a strong force to be reckoned with, and in particular, they use biotechnology. Now, those episodes of Star Trek Voyager came out in 1997. This book came out in 1999. So could that have possibly influenced the NJO group? Yeah, probably. To me, the Yuuzhan Vong feel an awful lot like someone was like, let's take species 8472, but make them space orcs. We don't get much of a sense of the religious zealousness of the Vong at this point. They do mention one of their gods, but they're more just violent. They abhor droids and technology. They hurt themselves. The characters all have scars, and they break their noses multiple times, and Nominor gouged out his own eye and put a weird Yuuzhan Vong creature in its place. And I think this is one example where the concept of the Yuuzhan Vong work really well for a limited number of books, but then as the books progress, we just have to make them more of a threat, more scary. So as the books will go on, they get more violent, there's a lot more torture, and I don't like those parts particularly. But at this point, yeah, they do feel like this scary new threat, and their technology is different, and how do you face that? Their Dovin vassals can strip the shields from your ship, so obviously the New Republic and our heroes are gonna have to do a lot of learning and changing to be able to face this threat. I do think, however, that how the Praetorate Vong were defeated in the end of the book just makes no sense at all. Star Wars isn't hard sci-fi at all. There's definitely an element of fantasy here where it's wizards in space. George Lucas had a lot of different influences when he was creating Star Wars, and he was influenced by both those old-time radio serials as well as stuff like The Seven Samurai. So I'm not expecting scientific accuracy from Star Wars, but the more I think about how they destroyed the world of Helska 4, the more I just go, oh, wait, what? What? Basically, Helska 4, where the Praetorate Vong have formed their base, is an ice planet, but beneath the ice crust are volcanoes. So our heroes decide that the way to defeat it is to get Lando's shield ships that he used on his mining world all the way back in the Thrawn trilogy books. And they're going to focus the light from Helska 4's star back on the planet. And this is going to heat everything up really fast, which will then make it get really, really cold. At one point, one character, I think it was Anakin, goes, "The fourth state of matter!" And I was like, that's plasma? Plasma's lightning and magnetic stuff. And so Helska 4 gets hot, then gets very, very cold, very, very fast, stops spinning, and then starts spinning really, really fast, and then blows up. That's like, okay, that's one way to take out the bad guys for now, but that made absolutely no sense to me at all. And two, the conclusion felt very fast, almost a little abrupt. We had the penultimate battle where a New Republic Star Destroyer shows up, completely underestimates the Yuuzhan Vong, and is destroyed for it. So it almost felt as though Salvatore realized that we can't end on such a downer ending. We need the Praetorate Vong to be destroyed. But the chapter where that happens is short. And then we have a short chapter where Luke's thinking about how everything's changed and we defeated them, but I think there's more of a threat to come. And then we have a final chapter where Han and Leia go to the remains of Cern Pindal so that Han can bid Chewie farewell, which was nice, which was a nice ending. It's just, compared to some of the other chapters that preceded it, were very short. So, in conclusion, I enjoyed my read of Vector Prime. While I'm not 100% decided whether I like Chewie's ultimate fate, I did think that it was an exciting series starter. I feel like it set up a lot for future books. Unfortunately, I also think it set precedents for the Vong being just this really dark, really super violent enemy, which I'm not crazy about. And the end is, frankly, bizarre. So next time, I will be starting the first book in the Dark Tide duology by Michael A. Stackpole, Dark Tide Onslaught.